Welcome back to the Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent. There are some places in Metro Detroit that flood every time we get heavy rains. You might be familiar with the stress and disruption this causes. Either you live in one of these floodplains or perhaps it's part of your everyday commute to work. One of these floodplains is the Ecorse Creek watershed. Its headwaters start in Romulus, where it's just a little ditch you can step over. The watershed includes cities like Dearborn Heights, Westland, Taylor, and River Rouge. And it empties into the Detroit River in Ecorse, where you could take a small boat through it. Flooding may seem inevitable, but at least one organization is working to address stormwater flooding in the Ecorse Creek watershed. Friends of the Detroit River is one of 17 organizations that was awarded Watershed Council grants from the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy, or EGLE for short. The watershed grants total $600,000. Friends of the Detroit River will also receive $40,000 to address flooding and stormwater runoff problems in some of the most flood-prone communities in Metro Detroit. Mackenzie Wallachek is the Stewardship Director for Friends of the Detroit River, and she joins us now. Mackenzie, welcome to the Metro.
Thank you for having us.
So what problem does this grant from EGLE address?
Yeah, so this grant is going to allow us to develop some concept plans, which are the very early blueprints that lay out big picture ideas for what improvements along Ecorse Creek might look like.
Okay, and we're going to get into some of those big picture ideas in a moment here, but first, where is the Ecorse Creek watershed? Why does it flood so much?
Yeah, so the Ecorse Creek watershed is just south of the Rouge watershed and is roughly about 12 communities wide. We see a lot of issues with flooding in this watershed because of the high amounts of impervious surfaces like cement, buildings, and other infrastructure that doesn't allow rainwater to penetrate the ground.
Okay. So this is a case of nature versus man or woman or person. Now, Ecorse Creek today, it's not what it was 100 years ago. And unsurprisingly, the way that it's changed has been at the hands of people. Can you talk about the interesting history of how it's changed over the years?
Yeah, so Ecorse Creek used to be a naturally meandering waterway. It was straightened out to help the agricultural fields around the creek drain so the plants did not flood. And then as the area urbanized and more folks started living in these areas, agriculture was phased out. And now we have thousands of homes that are built right up next to the edge of the creek. And all of that hard infrastructure, the cement areas are not allowing the water to flow into the creek naturally like it used to. And instead, these storm drains are pushing high volumes of water during these rain events into the creek at very flashy levels, which are causing erosion and other issues that folks in that watershed see firsthand.
You said a naturally meandering waterway, which evokes such a lovely image, and things have changed, although, of course, people can still very much appreciate Ecorse Creek. But I want to talk about now what exactly you plan to do with this grant, some of those big picture ideas, but maybe you can talk to us about them in a pretty simple way, if possible.
Yeah, so the types of projects that we're looking at will ultimately vary based on the needs and the visions of the community, the actual site's potentials, and what we're permitted and allowed to do. But all of these projects are essentially trying to create more storage for rainwater when we have big storm events. And then when it is not raining, they would serve as secondary benefits, offering more access to nature and recreation, more wildlife habitat, and improving our water quality.
Okay, these all sound like really important benefits, Mackenzie, but $40,000 doesn't sound like a lot when you consider how big the flooding and infrastructure problems are in Southeast Michigan.
Yes, you're correct there. This is very early stages of what these projects might look like. We will definitely need to seek out more funding to finalize designs, bring them through permitting and construction, but it's a great first place to start, and we're really excited to have this opportunity in this watershed.
This is the Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent. Our guest is Mackenzie Wallachek, the Stewardship Director for Friends of the Detroit River. We're talking about the challenge of stormwater runoff and flooding in the Ecorse Creek watershed. Friends of the Detroit River is one of 17 organizations that was awarded grants from the Michigan Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy, or EAGLE for short. The watershed grants total $600,000, and Friends of the Detroit River will receive $40,000. Now, Mackenzie, I'm wondering how you choose where to spend the much needed grant dollars when you get to the construction stage.
Yeah, so we spent the last year prioritizing a list of about 85 different potential sites along Ecorse Creek. And ultimately, we highlighted 11 priority areas that we're going to focus our efforts on. And specifically, this grant is going to allow us to develop concept designs for 2 of those 11 priority areas.
Okay. Talk about some of the solutions that you have in your toolbox, especially I think one that's interesting is some of the nature-based ones.
Yeah, we love to use nature-based solutions here at Friends of the Detroit River. Whenever possible, we try to incorporate habitat restoration for our fish and wildlife, and we recognize, providing that also enhances the quality of life for the people that use, live, and recreate around the creek.
And so paint a little bit more of a picture, though, if you can, about what those nature-based solutions look like.
Yeah, they can vary very vastly. So they can be as simple as planting native trees and creating no-mow zones. So just allowing native plants to grow and put their deep roots into the soils and create a more structured creek bed, so we have more absorption of that rainwater. It could be as advanced as actually creating a whole new floodplain, so building out more storage for the water to be in. It can look like retention or detention ponds that help kind of capture the storm water and allow it to infiltrate and slow it down before it reaches the creek. There's many options in the toolkit for this, and that's why we are relying on communities to be a part of what the visioning for these sites will look like.
85 to 11 to 2 sites. How do you do the community engagement piece there?
Yeah, so to identify the 85 sites, we originally had a survey that we were offering in person and online. We also held multiple listening sessions and different community events, tabling at farmers markets and other places that folks in the watershed are already visiting to capture their ideas. We then took that and worked with other local stakeholders and academics to prioritize the 85 sites and all of the feedback that was received using data like what types of issues are those communities seeing? Where are the open spaces that will allow us to do projects like this? Where are the willing landowners? And essentially all of that funneled down into those 11 priority sites. And then with the help of our Ecorse Creek committee, we narrowed down those 11 to prioritize these 2 sites for the concept designs. And we welcome folks to join the Ecorse Creek committee. It is open to the public, and we love to hear other people's thoughts.
Mackenzie, I'm wondering about the appetite of willing landowners, if you're running into a lot of them, or if there are challenges in getting folks to get on board.
There's definitely challenges. We've noticed most of the willing landowners right now are the cities themselves, the public land that's already available. We have had a handful of private landowners that are in support of this type of work, and that is definitely being considered. Really, the access to land along the creek is our limiting factor here. So the more willing landowners, the more broader and larger these projects could be.
So that's why that community engagement aspect is such a vital piece of this. As briefly as you can, how many more steps are in the process before we would see the site improvements that you've talked about?
The physical site improvements are still many years down the road. After concept designs, we will have to do feasibility studies, full design, permitting, and then construction. So we have about a handful of more steps before we actually will see ground break at any of these sites.
Okay, it's the journey of 1,000 miles. It begins with one step. Mackenzie Wallachek, Stewardship Director for Friends of the Detroit River. Thanks so much for joining us on the Metro.
Thank you.
This is the Metro on WDET. An extreme heat warning is in effect for Genesee, Macomb, Oakland, and Wayne counties until 8 p.m. Tuesday. Heat index values will exceed 100 degrees. There are air-conditioned spaces to cool down in. Go to WDET.org/cool for a comprehensive list of cooling centers throughout Metro Detroit. Up next, the Kronk's Boxing Gym is moving back to Detroit, where it produced some of the world's greatest boxers. We'll hear more about that next. This is the Metro on WDET, and this is WDET-FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation.